Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting straight to something I know you think about a lot. Multitasking.
Mm-hmm.
You sent over some really interesting material, things like the multitasking mirage, and, well, our job here is to really dig into whether this idea, juggling everything at once, does it actually make you more productive?
Or is it maybe pulling the rug out from under your efficiency?
Exactly.
Yeah, because you, like so many people, are probably trying to navigate this world that just feels like it demands constant juggling.
Right.
And the sources you've shared, they really make us question if that feeling, of being a multitasking master, is it actually serving you?
Or just wasting effort.
Precisely. Wasted effort, maybe even burnout.
And, it hit me right away reading through this research. They're suggesting that heavy multitasking can chop a 40% off your productivity.
40%, yeah.
Think about that. You mentioned feeling like you never have enough time.
Right. Constant.
Well, your sources here are pointing to a potential 40% of your effort just poof, evaporating because of task switching.
That's like losing almost half your workday. It's kind of staggering.
It is. It really makes you rethink those moments, answering emails during a Zoom call, thinking about the next thing.
Yeah, all at the same time. So how are we going to approach this? How do we make sense of why this happens and maybe what you can do about it based on what you sent?
Okay, right. Plan. First, we need to get crystal clear on what's really going on when we think we're multitasking. Because the material, it draws a really sharp line, doesn't it? Between true multitasking and, well, what most of us are doing.
This rapid-fire task switching.
Then, let's look at the science. Why does all that switching have such a mental cost?
Good. And following that, we should explore why we do it. Our brains seem almost wired to push us towards it, even when the sources are screaming, don't.
Right, even when it's clearly not the best way.
And then the impact, the real impact on the quality of your work, creativity.
Yeah, and not just output. You flagged how draining it feels, right? End of the day exhaustion. So we'll look at the broader picture: stress, well-being, even memory. And technology. We can't ignore tech's role in this mess.
Definitely a double-edged sword there, based on the sources.
Okay. And finally, we shift to the solution, right? What the material frames as the antidote.
Single tasking, focusing on one thing. Or what's often called deep work.
Deep work, yeah. And maybe some practical ways to actually do that. Strategies from the sources.
Sounds like a solid plan. Let's dig in.
Okay, let's start right at the beginning then. Multitasking versus task switching. That book you sent, The Multitasking Mirage, it makes a really clear distinction.
It really does. It basically says true simultaneous multitasking. It's actually pretty rare for our brains, at least for complex stuff.
So it only really works when one task is totally automatic.
Exactly, like walking and talking, or maybe folding laundry while you listen to something familiar, things that don't really need conscious brain power.
Right, autopilot stuff. But the problem kicks in when we try to handle two or more things that actually need focus. Need us to engage our brains.
Cognitive tasks, that's the term they use. Things like writing that report you mentioned, or actively participating in a meeting, learning something new.
Solving a tricky problem.
All those things rely heavily on our executive functions up here in the prefrontal cortex. So when you're juggling emails and that report, that's the part of your brain getting totally overloaded. Does that feel familiar, that pulled in multiple directions feeling?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. It feels like my brain is literally being stretched.
Yeah.
So what's the key difference? What can our brain handle versus what we try to make it do?
Well, the crucial point from your sources, I think, is that our attention system, for conscious thought anyway, it isn't like a floodlight, illuminating everything at once.
Wow.
It's more like a spotlight. One of the articles you sent used that analogy.
Not a spotlight.
Yeah.
That can only really shine intensely on one thing at a time.
Exactly. That book, The Multitasking Mirage, had another good one, a busy highway narrowing to a single-lane bridge.
Yeah, I remember that. Only one car gets through at a time.
Precisely. So while your brain can kind of keep several things in mind, that core processing unit, your focused attention, it can only truly engage with one demanding task at any given moment.
So when I think I'm multitasking on those cognitive tasks, writing, planning, whatever, what's really happening according to the research you sent?
You're actually just rapidly shifting your focus back and forth, back and forth.
Task switching. That's what the material call it.
Yep. Glance at email, back to the report, check a notification, back to the report. It feels simultaneous.
But it's not. It's just super fast jumping.
Like those plate spinners at the circus, right? Looks like they're keeping them all going at once.
But really, they're just rushing frantically from one to the next, giving each a little nudge before it falls.
Our brains are doing something kind of similar with these cognitive demands.
That's a really important distinction, isn't it? Because believing we're truly multitasking makes us think we can handle more. We underestimate the cost of all that jumping.
Absolutely. And you mentioned feeling mentally exhausted. Even on busy days, this could be a huge part of why.
Makes sense.
Yeah, recognizing it as task switching forces us to acknowledge it's not seamless, it's not free, there are real cognitive penalties involved.
Which is what we need to get into next, the actual costs.
Right, the switching costs.
Okay, so we're task switching, not really multitasking
Yeah.
when it comes to, actual brain work. Now, what's the real damage? What's this rapid switching doing to our brains, our productivity, based on the research you found?
Well, the research you highlighted, it consistently points to these significant switching costs, real penalties in time, mental energy, accuracy, overall performance.
Okay, let's start with time. That's the one I feel most acutely. Never enough time.
Yeah.
How does switching eat into it?
Okay, so every single time your brain shifts focus, it's not instant. There's a tiny delay.
Like a mental gear change.
Right. Exactly. You have to disengage from task A, redirect your attention, activate the rules for task B, then fully re-engage. And research shows these little time lags happen even between really simple tasks.
So tiny pauses, milliseconds maybe, doesn't sound like much.
Individually, no. Very short. But they accumulate fast. If you're constantly bouncing between emails, reports, Slack messages, whatever, all day long, those tiny fractions of a second add up. Big time.
To that 40% productivity loss we talked about earlier.
That's what some research suggests for heavy multitaskers. Yeah, it's a huge potential loss.
40%. That's like working 8 hours, but only getting, 5 hours of actual focused work done?
Something like that. It's a massive hidden cost, and it speaks directly to that feeling of never having enough time.
Yeah, wow.
It really is. One source used an analogy I liked driving a car by constantly slamming the brakes, then flooring the accelerator.
Oh, okay. Lots of energy, not much smooth progress.
Exactly. You use a ton of energy, but the journey takes way longer. And it's not just the wasted time. It's also about the increased mental effort, the cognitive load.
Right, the cognitive load. That constant shifting must be exhausting.
Yeah.
I definitely feel that mental fatigue you mentioned. End of the day, just drained.
It really is draining. Each switch requires your brain to, basically stop the current task, retrieve the info for the new one, like, okay, where was I on this report, or what was that email about, and actively suppress interference from the task you just left behind.
That sounds like a lot of mental juggling.
It is. This constant mental gear shifting significantly ramps up the demands on your working memory.
So even if I feel like I'm being super productive, my brain's actually working way harder just managing the transitions.
Pretty much. Leaving less energy for the actual tasks themselves.
Okay.
And when that cognitive load gets too high, performance suffers. Harder to think clearly, make good decisions, solve complex problems, the kind of stuff you need to do.
And you just feel wiped out, even if you haven't finished the big things.
Exactly. It's like trying to do mental gymnastics while carrying, a heavy backpack. Everything's just harder.
Yeah.
And that increased mental strain leads to something else I know you've experienced. More mistakes.
Oh, yeah. Error rate. Definitely relate to that. Trying to do too much at once. Silly errors creep in. Typos.
Yeah.
Missing details.
And the research you shared confirms that. It's not just you. Studies show error rates can double, sometimes even triple, when people switch frequently compared to focusing on one thing.
Double or triple. Wow.
Yeah. Overlooking details in reports, typos in important emails, misinterpreting information, all sorts of things become more likely.
And fixing those errors just eats up more time. It completely negates any time you thought you were saving by multitasking.
Precisely. It's a vicious cycle sometimes. And there's another really fascinating concept one of your sources mentioned. Attention residue.
Attention residue. Okay, intriguing. What's that?
It's this idea from researcher Sophie Leroy that even after you consciously switch to a new task, part of your brain, your cognitive resources, are still kind of stuck on the previous one.
Huh. Like mental leftovers?
Kind of. Your mind is still subconsciously processing bits of what you were just doing. So less of your mental bandwidth is fully available for the new thing.
So we're never really fully present with the new task if our mind is still partly chewing on the last one. That explains why it sometimes takes a minute to really get back into something after an interruption.
That's the idea. Until that residue dissipates, your performance on the new task is likely slower, less effective.
And if you're switching constantly, like every few minutes with emails and notifications,
you might be in this perpetual state of divided attention, never truly dedicating your full cognitive power to anything.
Like trying to listen to someone while still mentally drafting an email. You're there, but not really there.
Exactly that feeling. Your mind feels cluttered, right? Still processing the last notification or email.
Yeah, definitely felt that.
And neuroscience backs this up. Brain scans show increased activity in the parts of the brain handling executive control and conflict monitoring when we switch tasks. It confirms it's an active, resource-heavy process.
So the science seems pretty clear, based on what you shared.
Mm-hmm.
Our brains aren't built for efficient cognitive multitasking. It's mostly rapid task switching.
With some pretty significant hidden costs impacting productivity, mental energy, the whole shebang.
Okay. The evidence against multitasking on these cognitive tasks seems pretty strong then. But here's the thing. If it's so inefficient, so draining, why do we do it? Why is there this persistent feeling, this belief that we're actually being more productive when we juggle?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the sources you provided, they dig into some really interesting psychological factors, and societal ones too, that help explain this persistent mirage.
Okay, like what?
Well, one of the big ones is often called the illusion of productivity.
The feeling of being busy tricks us into thinking we're actually getting more done.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Sometimes just having a long list of things I've touched feels like an accomplishment.
Exactly. In many cultures, especially work cultures, busyness is often equated with importance, with productivity.
Right. Seeing someone frantically typing, answering calls, rushing around, it looks efficient.
It creates that impression, and we internalize it. We think, if I feel this busy, I must be accomplishing a lot.
And task switching definitely makes you feel busy, even if the actual output, the quality, isn't as good.
Precisely. Juggling creates this intense feeling of being active, engaged, even if quality or speed suffers. And that feeling can be more immediately rewarding, psychologically speaking,
than the slower, maybe less frantic process of deep, focused work.
Exactly. Even if that deep work yields much better results in the long run, we're often mistaking activity for actual achievement.
That really resonates. I think I've definitely fallen into that trap. Feeling productive just because I've been doing stuff all day, even if the big, important projects haven't moved much. It's very common. What else makes multitasking so tempting?
What else?
Well, another big one, especially with things like checking your phone constantly, is the dopamine hit.
Dopamine from switching tasks.
Yeah, potentially. Every time we switch, especially to something potentially new or engaging, checking email, social media, our brain can release a little bit of dopamine, that pleasure and reward chemical.
So it's like a tiny neurological reward for switching, even if the switch is totally counterproductive.
In a way, yeah. These little microdoses of dopamine create a feedback loop. They reinforce the switching behavior.
Because it feels good momentarily.
Right. It feels good to check that notification, open that new tab, so we do it again, even if it's derailing the important report writing.
And tech platforms know this, right? The sources mention that.
Oh, absolutely. They're often specifically designed to exploit this. Constant notifications, variable rewards. They keep us hooked, keep us switching.
Yeah, the endless scroll on social media. You never know what interesting thing is next. Keeps you pulling that lever.
Exactly like a slot machine for your attention. What about FOMO? Fear of missing out. Does that play into it?
Oh, big time, I bet.
Definitely. This constant connectivity we have, it fuels FOMO. We worry that if we disconnect even for an hour to focus,
we'll miss something critical. An urgent email, breaking news, some social update.
Right. And that anxiety pushes us to keep multiple channels open, constantly monitoring, just in case, for fear of being left out.
So the desire to stay informed, which feels like a good thing, actually drives this fragmented attention that we've just established is not so good.
Precisely. And it's not just internal psychology. Societal pressures, workplace norms, they play a huge role too. You mentioned feeling the need to be constantly responsive, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But how does it fit in? I mean, even with all this research saying multitasking is bad, I still see ability to multitask listed as a desirable skill on job description sometimes. It feels like a disconnect.
You nailed it. There is often a disconnect. There's this expectation of constant responsiveness in many workplaces.
Instant email replies, always available on chat.
Right. And employees who do that might be perceived as more dedicated, more efficient, even if their deep work suffers.
And project deadlines piling up.
Yeah.
It feels like you have to juggle.
Exactly. The pressure seems to demand it. So being seen juggling multiple things can become a kind of performative work, signaling commitment.
Even if it's at the expense of actually making deep progress on any one thing.
That's the potential downside. And sometimes, let's be honest, multitasking is just a way to avoid something else.
Procrastination, disguised as productivity.
Kind of. You mentioned struggling to start that challenging report.
Guilty as charged.
Yeah.
I'll suddenly find a million other urgent little tasks to do.
Exactly. When faced with something hard or tedious, that requires real mental effort. The temptation to switch to something easier, more instantly gratifying, check Twitter, answer a quick email, it's very strong.
It's an escape.
A temporary escape from the discomfort of concentrating hard.
So it's avoidance, even though it feels like we're still being productive, ticking off those smaller things.
Right. And I guess for some people, there might just be a natural preference for variety. Getting bored easily, that's true too. Some people might just have a higher need for stimulation, making them more inclined to switch. And like any behavior, it can just become a habit if you consistently work distracted.
Your brain adapts.
Yeah.
Focused attention starts to feel weird, boring even.
It can, yeah. It takes effort to retrain that focus muscle.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds like there's this whole complex web. Psychological factors, societal pressures, dopamine hits, avoidance, all keeping us hooked on this idea of multitasking.
Even when the science, and maybe our own gut feeling, tells us it's not the best way.
Yeah. Recognizing those drivers seems like a really crucial first step, doesn't it? Towards maybe choosing to focus more intentionally.
Absolutely. Understanding the why is key to changing the what.
Okay, so we're much clearer now on why we're so drawn to multitasking, despite, well, all the drawbacks. Let's dig deeper into those drawbacks now. Specifically, how does this divided attention really impact the quality and the creativity of our work?
Right. This is where the rubber really meets the road. Because multitasking might feel productive.
But the reality, according to your sources, is often a big drop in quality. And it kills creativity.
That seems to be the consensus. Let's start with basic efficiency again. That myth of saving time.
Right. It feels like doubling up, but the material suggests otherwise, especially for complex tasks.
It really does. Remember those switching costs? The time lost to mental readjustments every time you switch? Well, that cumulative lost time often means that juggling multiple complex tasks actually takes longer overall than if you just tackled them sequentially.
Right.
One by one, with focus.
Longer. Really?
Yeah. One article you sent used the example of writing 2 different reports. If you're constantly jumping back and forth between them.
All that mental reorientation time adds up.
Exactly. And it can easily take you longer to finish both compared to focusing intently on report A until it's done than moving fully to report B.
So we end up spending more total time, getting less actual work done. That's completely backwards from the whole idea of multitasking as a time saver.
It is counterintuitive, but that's what the research suggests. And then there's the critical issue of quality, deep thinking, careful analysis, thoroughness. The kind of attention to detail you need for important projects. That requires sustained, unbroken focus.
And when your attention is constantly fragmented?
The work you produce tends to be shallower, more prone to errors, like we discussed.
I can see that. If I'm trying to draft an important email while also reviewing a document, yeah, the email's probably going to be less clear, more mistakes.
Exactly. Or think about those reports again. Writing them in short bursts between checking emails and messages, you're just less likely to fully immerse yourself in the topic.
Leading to a less thorough, maybe less insightful final product.
Potentially, yes. Your sources even highlighted how in critical fields like healthcare or aviation, this kind of divided attention can have really serious, even dangerous consequences.
Yeah, that's sobering. And what about creativity? Those aha moments, innovative solutions. They seem to come when you're really deep in a problem, don't they?
You're spot on. Creativity, real innovation, it rarely emerges from fragmented attention.
Why is that?
Because breakthrough ideas, novel solutions, they often arise during periods of deep immersion, uninterrupted focus, what people often call a flow state.
Flow state, right, where you're totally absorbed, energized by the task.
Exactly, and that state is incredibly hard to achieve when you're constantly switching gears, constantly being interrupted.
Constant task switching is basically the polar opposite of the deep immersion needed for flow.
Precisely. If your attention is always getting pulled away, you never give your mind that uninterrupted space it needs to. Well, to wander productively. To make non-obvious connections between ideas, to come up with something genuinely creative.
So the result might be functional work,
Yeah.
but probably not inspired or innovative work.
That's a good way to put it. Industries that rely heavily on innovation, R&D for example, really suffer when their people are constantly multitasking.
So the performance penalty isn't just about speed. It's fundamentally about quality, depth of thought, creativity.
Yeah. We're essentially trading thoroughness and innovation for the illusion of being busy.
And that trade-off. Probably not worth it in the long run.
Often not. Not for the quality of your work and not for bigger picture progress either.
Okay. We've focused a lot on work impact, but one article you looked at really emphasized that the costs go beyond productivity. What about the less obvious toll on stress, well-being, even memory?
Yeah, this is really crucial, especially given how stressed you mentioned feeling, because that constant state of fragmented attention, that cognitive overload from habitual task switching, it has significant knock-on effects for our mental and emotional health.
Starting with stress levels, how does juggling lead to more stress? Sometimes ticking off small things feels like it reduces stress for me.
That immediate hit of accomplishment from checking off small tasks can feel good, sure, temporary relief, but on a deeper physiological level, when we're constantly switching, our brain perceives a state of high demand.
Even if it's just the demand of tracking everything.
Right. And that can trigger the body's stress response system, release hormones like cortisol.
Cortisol, the stress hormone.
Exactly. Helpful in short bursts, but chronic elevation.
Yeah.
From persistent multitasking, your sources suggest that can have really negative long-term effects. Increased anxiety, sleep problems, weakened immune system, even potentially more serious health issues down the line.
So that feeling of being constantly on, never quite catching up, fueled by trying to do too much at once, is actually creating this underlying chronic stress.
That seems to be the link the research points to. And remember the cognitive load we talked about.
Yeah.
Like constant mental exertion. It inevitably leads to mental fatigue.
Like physical muscles getting tired.
Exactly the same idea for your brain. If you constantly work it without recovery, it gets tired, less effective. This mental fatigue builds up, leads to difficulty concentrating even when you try to focus, more irritability, maybe poorer decision-making.
And if that mental exhaustion becomes chronic,
Yeah.
that's when we get into burnout territory, right?
Yeah.
Which is something I know a lot of people worry about, me included.
Precisely. Burnout is that state of emotional, physical, mental exhaustion from prolonged stress and rampant multitasking with its inefficiency and cognitive strain. It can definitely accelerate that process, contributing to cynicism, detachment, lack of motivation.
Wow, that's concerning. And it's not just how we feel, is it? One paper you looked at mentioned memory and learning, too. How does fragmented attention mess with that?
Yeah. Learning effectively, remembering stuff. It requires deep processing, really engaging with the material, thinking critically, connecting it to what you already know. Task switching completely undermines that deep processing. When your attention's divided, information gets processed more superficially. Interruptions break that cognitive chain needed to properly encode information into long-term memory.
So if I'm trying to read a complex article for work, but I keep glancing at my inbox, I'm probably not going to retain much of the article.
That's the danger. You might passively read the words, but that deeper level of engagement needed for lasting retention, it's just not happening. And over time, this can even feel like a general decline in memory function.
Scary. And finally, the sources mentioned impacts on emotional regulation and relationships.
Yeah. Think about it. When you're constantly stressed and mentally fatigued,
You're more likely to be impatient, easily frustrated with colleagues, family.
absolutely. When your mental resources are depleted by task switching, you have less capacity for emotional self-control. You might snap more easily, be less patient. And also, think about being in a conversation with someone who keeps checking their phone. How does that feel?
Annoying, like they're not really listening.
Right. It sends a clear signal, you don't have my full attention, and that can definitely damage the quality of interactions and relationships over time. Meaningful connection needs focus, presence.
So the multitasking habit at work can actually spill over and hurt our personal lives too. Wow. It really sounds like the costs of this mirage are incredibly far-reaching, not just productivity, but our whole well-being.
That really is the key takeaway. It's not just about getting less done. It's about a significant hidden toll on your mental, emotional, even physical health in the long run.
Okay. So based on all this, we're biologically limited in truly multitasking cognitively. Task switching has all these negative costs. Now, let's talk about what feels like a major driver, technology. One article called it a real double-edged sword. How has tech amplified this whole problem?
That's a perfect way to put it, double-edged sword. Because while tech offers amazing benefits, information access, connection, all that,
Sure.
it has also created an environment that is, well, almost uniquely designed to fragment our attention, to normalize constant interruption. We live in this attention economy, right?
Where our focus is the product being sold, basically.
Pretty much. Our ability to focus is this valuable commodity that platforms, services, apps are constantly competing for.
And they're not exactly incentivized to help us focus deeply on one thing for hours, are they? Their models often rely on engagement. Clicks. Constant checking.
Not usually, no. The material you provided points out several key ways tech is often engineered for distraction. Notifications, for starters.
The pings, the buzzes, the pop-ups.
Exactly. Designed specifically to pull our focus away from whatever we were doing and draw us back to the app that sent it.
Like little digital taps on the shoulder? Constantly. Leading us down rabbit holes.
Precisely. And then there are variable rewards. Think social media feeds, even emails sometimes.
Variable rewards.
Yeah, you never quite know what interesting or validating thing you might find when you check. That unpredictability. It hooks right into our brain's dopamine system. Creates this compelling urge to check frequently, even when we know we shouldn't.
Like a slot machine for attention. Keep pulling the lever, maybe you'll get a hit.
Exactly. And features like infinite scroll.
Oh, yeah. Lethal.
They eliminate natural stopping points, encourage endless browsing. There's always more content just a swipe away. Makes it incredibly hard to consciously disengage.
Plus all the persuasive design stuff. Streaks, personalized recommendations, autoplay videos, all designed to keep us hooked.
Carefully crafted to keep us engaged, keep us coming back, keep us switching our attention towards them, away from our own focused work.
And the fact that we carry these devices everywhere, the distractions aren't just at our desks anymore.
Absolutely. Potential interruptions are in our pockets, constantly connected, ready to pull us away, whether you're trying to work on that report, have a real conversation, or just relax.
So there's this constant low-level awareness of potential digital input, even when we're not actively looking at the screen.
It keeps our attention perpetually divided, yeah. Even subconsciously.
It feels like the boundary between focus time and interruptible time is just dissolved for a lot of us.
It really has blurred. And then there's the workplace expectation of speed. Email, Slack, Teams.
Instant messaging needs instant response expected.
Often, yeah. These tools are great for quick comms, but they've fostered this culture of expected immediacy. We feel obligated to constantly monitor, interrupt our work, respond quickly.
Fearing we'll look unresponsive or drop the ball otherwise.
Right. Which makes carving out those essential blocks of uninterrupted deep work time incredibly difficult.
And with the internet giving us access to everything, there's also this tendency towards shallow browsing, jumping between links, skimming headlines.
Instead of digging deep into one thing, that's right, faced with information overload, we often resort to skimming, jumping around. Information snacking, some call it.
And that trains our brains for rapid shifts, for superficial processing, making deep concentration even harder.
It can weaken that focus muscle, yeah. And finally, one article mentioned how tech blurs work-life boundaries. Work emails, collaboration tools on personal devices, accessible 204/7.
It's always on culture.
Exactly. Makes it hard to truly disconnect, rest, recover. Allows work interruptions to fragment personal time too.
So yeah. Technology, huge benefits, but it has definitely amplified the challenge of focused attention in a massive way.
It really has. It feels like a constant uphill battle sometimes.
Okay, so we're fighting biology, psychology, and technology here. It feels a bit overwhelming. What's the way out? The material talked about rediscovering deep waters.
Yeah.
The power of single tasking, deep work.
Exactly. So we've explored the problems with multitasking, how tech makes it worse.
Yeah.
Now the solution and the sources you shared, they consistently point towards consciously cultivating focused attention.
Single tasking.
The direct antidote. Dedicating your full cognitive attention to one specific task for a set time, actively minimizing all potential distractions.
It does require real intentionality, doesn't it? Actively resisting that constant pull of distractions, committing to just one thing.
It does require real intentionality, doesn't it?
Okay.
Actively resisting that constant pull of distractions, committing to just one thing. But here's the interesting part your sources highlight. Single tasking isn't necessarily about working slower. By eliminating those mental switching costs we talked about, you can often complete demanding tasks more quickly and to a much higher standard.
So focusing on quality in the moment actually leads to better efficiency overall. That's another one of those counterintuitive things.
It really seems to be the case. And building on that basic idea of single tasking is this more comprehensive concept of deep work. Cal Newport's term, right?
Yeah.
Referenced in your materials.
Right, deep work. I remember seeing his name. What exactly is it again?
Newport defines it as professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their limit.
Okay, pushing your limits.
Yeah, these efforts create new value, improve your skill, and are hard to replicate. He contrasts it specifically with shallow work.
Shallow work being the logistical stuff, non-demanding tasks, often done while distracted.
Exactly. Answering routine emails, scheduling meetings, basic admin, stuff that doesn't create much new value or require intense focus.
So, writing a complex analytical report, deep work, clearing your inbox of routine stuff, shallow work.
That's a great example. And while shallow work needs doing, the argument is that deep work is where the real progress happens. Innovation, skill development.
And Newport argues that in our distracted world, the ability to do deep work consistently is becoming rarer.
And therefore exceptionally valuable in
Well,
the modern economy, yeah.
Makes sense. If everyone else is distracted, the person who can focus deeply has a huge advantage. So what are the specific benefits of cultivating this deep focus ability?
Well, the material you shared lists quite a few. We've mentioned superior quality output, increased efficiency,
Right, no switching costs?
plus enhanced learning and skill development. Deep concentration lets you process and retain complex info much better, and it's the key to accessing that flow state.
Which is not only super productive, but also feels really good, right?
Yeah.
Intrinsically rewarding.
Exactly. Leads to greater satisfaction in your work.
And I can definitely imagine that focusing on one thing significantly reduces that feeling of overwhelm, the stress of juggling.
Absolutely. Successfully completing challenging tasks with focus, it gives you a strong sense of accomplishment, control, counteracts anxiety,
Yeah.
and maybe most importantly, long-term. Consistently practicing focused attention actually strengthens your ability to concentrate.
Like exercising a muscle.
Very much like that. The more you use it intentionally, the stronger it gets. So embracing single tasking, striving for deep work, it's not just a productivity hack. It's a fundamental shift towards a more intentional, maybe more fulfilling way of working and living.
That sounds really appealing.
Yeah.
Especially given that scattered feeling I mentioned. So how do we actually do it? How do we start cultivating this deep focus in our crazy, distraction-filled world? The sources must have offered some practical strategies.
Oh, definitely. They provide a really helpful toolkit.
Yeah.
Actionable stuff you can start doing. A key area is intentionally managing your time. Techniques like time blocking, where you literally schedule blocks in your calendar for specific single tasks.
Like 9:00 to 10:30 a.m., focus on report X, and treat it like a real appointment.
Exactly. Non-negotiable. Protect that time fiercely. Another popular one mentioned is the Pomodoro technique.
Right, the tomato timer. Work for 25 minutes, short break.
That's the one. Helps break down daunting tasks and maintain focus in short bursts. And your sources also stress prioritizing your MIT's most important tasks.
Do the deep work on those first, when energy is highest.
That's the idea. Tackle the big rocks first.
Okay, those make sense. What about the environment, all the distractions around us? Physical space, digital space?
Creating a focused environment is crucial. Physically, that might mean closing your office door, using noise-canceling headphones, finding a quiet spot if you work from home, minimizing interruptions.
Decluttering the workspace, maybe. Does that help?
Some people find it really does. A tidy desk can lead to a clearer mind. And equally vital today is managing the digital workspace.
Closing unnecessary tabs and apps.
Yes. Reducing those tempting digital escape routes, making it harder to just click away.
Makes sense. The old cluttered desk, cluttered mind thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the devices, the technology beast. How do we tame that? Stop it hijacking our attention.
Mastering notifications seems non-negotiable based on your sources.
Turn them off. All of them.
Well, all the non-essential ones. On
Uh-huh.
your phone, your computer. The goal is to shift from being reactive, letting devices dictate your attention, to being intentional. You decide when to check things.
So schedule specific times for email or social media checks rather than constant monitoring.
Exactly. Frees up huge chunks of potential focus time. And there are tools too, right? Website blockers, focus mode settings on phones.
To create harder digital boundaries during deep work time.
Right. It's about being proactive, intentional, not letting tech dictate your workflow.
Okay. What about the mental side? Training our minds to actually stay on task.
Yeah, the materials recommend practices like mindfulness, attention training,
Meditate.
regular mindfulness meditation, even just a few minutes a day, can seriously boost your ability to notice when your mind wanders and gently bring it back.
Build that focus muscle.
Exactly. One source also talked about embracing boredom.
Embracing boredom. How does that help?
Recognizing that the urge to switch tasks often comes from wanting to escape discomfort or lack of stimulation. Learning to just sit with that feeling without immediately reaching for a distraction. It builds mental resilience, your ability to sustain focus.
Interesting. Don't just run away from the hard stuff mentally.
Right. And also being intentional about transitions between tasks. Taking a brief pause, mentally closing out task A before jumping straight into task B helps minimize that attention residue.
Ah, okay. Clean break.
And finally, maybe obviously, scheduling regular rest.
Yeah.
Real breaks, away from screens, away from demanding work, absolutely crucial for replenishing mental resources, maintaining focus long term.
So it's a really holistic approach, isn't it? Managing time, environment, tech, and training the mind itself.
It really is. It definitely takes consistent effort. Conscious practice.
On a quick fix.
Definitely not. But the potential rewards, productivity, well-being, they seem incredibly significant based on everything we've discussed. It's about building that focus shield, as one source put it, an ongoing practice.
But by applying these tools, these techniques, you can start to push back against that multitasking mirage, create space for that deep, focused work.
That's the goal. Better results, greater fulfillment, professionally, personally, the whole deal.
This has been, wow, such an insightful deep dive, especially connecting it back to the material I shared. So just to kind of bring it all together.
It's a recap.
Yeah, it really seems what we think of as effective multitasking is actually this rapid task switching.
Back and forth, back and forth.
And it carries really significant hidden costs: time, mental energy, accuracy, overall performance.
Our brains really are more like that focus spotlight, not a broad floodlight for conscious stuff.
Right, and those cognitive costs, again, just quickly.
Potentially losing up to 40% productivity from those micro delays. Increased cognitive load, feeling drained, error rates doubling or tripling, and that attention residue never being fully present.
And we do it because of that illusion of productivity.
Yeah.
The dopamine hits, FOMO, workplace pressures, sometimes just avoiding hard stuff.
A powerful cocktail of reasons keeping us hooked.
Leading to real performance penalties, reduced efficiency overall, lower quality work, stifled creativity.
Because deep thinking needs focus.
And the impact goes way beyond work, right? The stress cycle, burnout risk, impaired memory and learning, even affecting emotional regulation and relationships.
Yeah, the ripple effects are huge.
And technology, a massive amplifier, designed often to capture attention with notifications, variable rewards, constant connectivity, making focus even harder.
A huge contributing factor, no doubt.
The good news, there's an antidote. Embracing single tasking, cultivating deep work.
That distraction-free concentration that pushes our limits and creates real value.
And we can get there with practical strategies. Time blocking, Pomodoro, prioritizing MITs, creating focused workspaces, managing digital distractions, notifications off, scheduled checks, mindfulness, embracing boredom, intentional transitions, and crucially, rest.
Absolutely. It's about consciously shifting from reactivity towards intention, deliberate engagement with our work, our lives.
This has really given me a lot to chew on, especially thinking about my own habits. It makes you wonder just how much of the day is spent in that state of divided attention without even realizing the true cost.
It's easy to fall into without conscious effort.
Yeah. So here's a final thought then for you listening. Considering everything we've talked about, the impact of multitasking, the power of focus, take a moment. Think about how intentionally dedicating your mind to one thing at a time, despite all those pressures pulling you away, how could that change things? Not just your productivity, your work quality, but your stress levels, your overall well-being, your engagement with the world. What's one small actionable step you could commit to taking, maybe even today, to start reclaiming your focus, to begin breaking free from that multitasking mirage?